It's just past 7:30 p.m. across India, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We will get you the top stories from India and the region. I am Anil Thomas. And for the news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Washington, D.C., Caroline Malone. Caroline, what are the big stories that we're tracking from the United States?
Well, good morning, Anil. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 p.m. in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll cover the vote at the United Nations on a ceasefire in Gaza that's failed. We'll have all the analysis. But first, here are the headlines. The U.S. draft resolution fails in United Nations. Russia and China veto down U.S. call for immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Blinken and Netanyahu meet in Israel for truce talks. U.S. lawmakers to vote on a $1.2 trillion spending package as they race to pass it before midnight to avoid a government shutdown. EU leaders mull ways to get more aid to Ukraine amid a new sense of urgency over protests from grain from Russia and Belarus. Breaking the defense bond taboo also being pushed. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes the first foreign leader to be conferred Bhutan's highest civilian honor, announces a 10,000 crore rupee support to Bhutan in the next 5-year plan. Well, Russia launched another missile and drone attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure on Friday. Russia fired 88 missiles and 63 Shahid drones, leaving at least 1 dead and 14 others injured. While Ukraine said almost half the missiles and drones were shot down, leading to less damage. The location targeted include Dnipro's dam in the southern city of Zaporizhzhia, which suffered extensive damage to its hydraulic structures. However, there was no risk of a breach. President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attack and said there was work underway to repair power supply in 9 regions. Amid the latest exchange of attacks, the Russian Defense Ministry stated on Friday that its recent strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure was part of counterattacks for Kyiv earlier incursions into Russian territory. The ministry said it successfully struck a number of power grid objects, railway nodes, ammunition depots, and other targets in Ukraine. The European Commission has proposed imposing tariffs on imports of grain from Russia and Belarus in their ongoing meeting in Brussels on Friday. The decision comes as a plan to prevent Moscow and its ally from distorting EU markets and appease farmers protesting cheap imports. The European Union's 27 leaders have gathered in Brussels to debate the EU response to farmers' protests over environmental rules and the Eurozone. On Thursday, the leaders also debated on supplying military aid to Ukraine using profits from frozen Russian assets. Well, DD India's Ishan Garg joins us from Brussels. Ishan, good evening. EU has a task on its hand. How does it manage to do the tightrope walk in this meet?
Well, a tightrope walk is not something that is uncommon for European Union leaders for a bloc this size. It always has countries that have diversified opinions on things. So it has had to tackle some very tough conversations all the way from the farmers' protests. First of all, a compromise had to be reached between a bloc pushed by Poland, France and Germany, who are asking the European Union to change some of its rules to actually make it slightly more difficult for Ukrainian imports to come in. So that was one difficult conversation. The other was, of course, the idea that profits from frozen Russian assets could be used to purchase Ukraine Military now leaders here have said that they have begun the conversation, and Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, has said that if everything goes well, if this conversation flows on smoothly, they should be able to give about $3 to $4 billion to Ukraine by July, which means that even if there is no consensus on that idea right here at this meeting, at least there is a conversation that is going to go on. Now, this is an idea that's already been very vehemently opposed by Russia's President Vladimir Putin, but the European Union is hoping that it will be able to use that $200 billion odd worth pot of money that's in frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine to some degree. So it's had to walk some very tough diplomatic tightropes, but the leaders here have said that they have found a big consensus, and if not that, at least an overwhelming majority of support on most of the issues that they have discussed.
Ishan, when it comes to breaking the defense bond at the Brussels summit, do you see, what could be the headway, that the leaders could deliberate on and find out?
Well, defense bonds is one issue that has always been a bit tricky for different countries, and the bloc has always struggled to come up with a common approach towards that problem. But now, as the EU is looking to shore in more money for its own defense infrastructure, and also to provide more money for Ukraine for its own defense, it's warming up to that idea very, very gradually. But apart from that, it's also been looking into some other ways to raise more money. For example, there are now conversations about the European Investment Bank to try and fund military companies, military production, defense operations, something that has been out of the EIB, the European Investment Bank's reach so far. So they are looking at what they call, quote unquote, innovative ways to raise money. They have unveiled a new plan for the entire EU bloc to ramp up its military production, and they're also looking to make it easier for member countries to actually procure arms within the bloc a lot more easily. So EU overall is warming up to the idea of spending more on defense, especially in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, and certainly so they are warming up to the idea of the defense bonds as well.
Ishan, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us this evening. Well, the UNSC voted on a U.S. draft resolution for ceasefire as the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had his 6th wartime visit to Israel, where he met with Israel's Prime Minister in Tel Aviv. Caroline Malone joins us from Washington, D.C. with the latest. Caroline, the UNSC and all the drama that unfolded, that resolution finally hitting a speed breaker. What's the way ahead for the United States?
Well, that's right. The United Nations Security Council has not passed the new US draft resolution on Gaza. Russia and China vetoed the US draft resolution that called for an immediate truce in Gaza, intensifying pressure on its ally. The new US resolution had expressed support for the talks in Qatar, the freeing of Israeli hostages and release of Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Tel Aviv on Friday after he visited Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Prior to the meeting with Netanyahu, which lasted about 40 minutes, Blinken said he would address the growing gap between the two countries. Blinken also met with Israeli war cabinet members. The stop in Tel Aviv caps Blinken's 6th round of shuttle diplomacy in the region since the October 7th Hamas attack in Israel. Well, Israel's spy chief, David Barnea, will travel to Doha, Qatar, on Friday to meet mediators who are trying to secure a Gaza ceasefire that would include a hostage release. Barnea will meet with his US counterpart, the CIA Director Bill Burns, Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, and Egypt's intelligence chief Abbas Kamal. Negotiations mediated by the US, Egypt and Qatar are centred on a truce of around 6 weeks that would allow the release of Israeli hostages in return for hundreds of Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. So moving on to our next story now. US lawmakers are set to vote on a $1.2 trillion spending package on Friday as they race to pass it before midnight to avoid a government shutdown. The sprawling measure, wrapping 6 bills, covers funding for over half the government, including the Department of Homeland Security, the Pentagon and health agencies for the next 6 months until the end of the fiscal year. Well, DD India's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Lawmakers here are already 6 months behind schedule on this because of lengthy negotiations to resolve funding and policy disputes. Now, they have scant time to approve the bill before a shutdown deadline this weekend. Republican leaders in the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, have signalled that they intend to hold a vote on Friday, bypassing a self-imposed rule requiring lawmakers be given at least 72 hours to review legislation before it comes up for a vote. There could be additional hurdles in the Senate, that's the upper chamber, where any one lawmaker's objection could prolong debate and delay a final vote. But as long as lawmakers act before Monday, the effects of a shutdown could be minimal since many federal workers at unfunded agencies would be off for the weekend anyway. But if a closure goes on longer, there could be more problems. It could disrupt tax filing season as more than half of the staff at the Internal Revenue Service would face furloughs. Border Patrol officers and around 1.3 million active duty military service members would have to work without pay. A previous shutdown sparked national travel delays after many Transportation Security Administration screeners called in sick as a protest. Even if a shutdown is avoided, credit ratings agencies have warned that Congress's repeated brinkmanship could hurt the US government's creditworthiness in the long run. In Washington, Kate Fisher reporting for DD India.
Well, the United Nations General Assembly has adopted the first global resolution on artificial intelligence. The resolution aims to encourage protecting personal data, monitoring AI for risks, and safeguarding human rights.
In a groundbreaking event, all 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly unanimously adopted the first global resolution on artificial intelligence on Thursday. The non-binding resolution encourages the protection of personal data, monitoring AI for risks, and the safeguarding of human rights. Proposed by the United States and co-sponsored by China and 121 other nations, the resolution seeks to close the digital gap within and between nations while using AI to augment shared priorities around sustainable development.
This technology has the potential to unlock more progress on more issues for more people. But in order to ensure equitable access to these benefits and mitigate risks for communities across the globe, we must approach this technology as a global community, leaving no one behind.
Governments around the world are seeking to shape AI's development amid fears of its potential to disrupt democratic processes, turbocharge fraud, spread misinformation, or lead to dramatic job losses, among other harms.
Today, as the UN and AI finally intersect, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to choose as one united global community to govern this technology rather than let it govern us. So let us reaffirm that AI will be created and deployed through the lens of humanity and dignity, safety and security, human rights and fundamental freedoms.
The resolution marks the beginning of a collective journey as countries around the world come together to shape safe, secure and trustworthy artificial intelligence systems. Dra Gyalpo for DD India.
Well, let's go back now to our story on the ceasefire talks that have been happening in the Middle East region, and in particular how US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We've actually just heard from Netanyahu after that meeting. Let's have more of a listen to what he had to say.
I met today with Secretary of State Blinken. I told him that I greatly appreciate the fact that more than 5 months we're standing together in the war against Hamas. I also told him that we recognize the need to evacuate the civilian population from war zones and of course to take care of humanitarian needs. We are working for this. But I also said that we have no way to defeat Hamas without entering Rafah and eliminating the rest of the Hamas battalions there. And I told him that I hope we will do it with the support of the United States, but if we have to, we will do it alone.
Well, just an hour ago, that United Nations Security Council vote on a ceasefire failed at the UN headquarters in New York. Let's go now to Alex Cadier, who's been covering the story from Tel Aviv and Israel. Alex, we've heard this vote has failed at the UN. What's happened in that situation?
Well, there was a veto by Russia and China, those two permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. We know that Algeria also voted against the rotating member of the UN Security Council. Certainly, we've seen this before. Russia and China voted down a resolution brought by the United States in October as well. And the sense we heard from the Deputy Ambassador, the Deputy Russian Ambassador to the United Nations, is that this resolution by the United States does not go far enough and is not particularly sincere enough in its desire for calling for an immediate ceasefire. Now, this will be an interesting development in so much that actually the US had previously vetoed similar resolutions calling for an immediate ceasefire and for the release of the hostages. Now, we understand the fact that this immediate ceasefire resolution was tied to the release of the hostages could have been one of the sticking points for Russia and China in their vetoing this resolution, but certainly no progress in the United Nations when it comes to a resolution towards a ceasefire. Nevertheless, that international pressure to get there, to get a stop in the fighting, and crucially to release those Israeli hostages is still mounting.
And Alex, what does that mean then for the US Secretary of State Blinken's trip to the region? He'd been in Israel trying to convince Israeli leaders to get on board with a ceasefire agreement, hadn't he?
Yeah, and he will continue doing that. He's just had a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. Quite a fractious meeting, we understand. We expected it to be a very tense meeting. This sixth visit by Anthony Blinken, very different to the last five. We know that the Secretary of State Blinken warned Prime Minister Netanyahu about Israel's security and place in the world being in peril, and that the Prime Minister may not realize it until it's too late. Secretary Blinken, according to reports, also said that Israel needs a coherent plan or they will be stuck in Gaza. So strong words from the Secretary of State there to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who also said, we will go into Rafah. We hope to have US support, but if not, we will go it alone. That Operation Rafah, Anthony Blinken had previously said, would be a mistake, and that the US position is against it. So clearly, a real collision course there between Israel and the United States on the issue of Rafah, on the issue of a ceasefire, and on the issue of the day after the war. So those tensions will continue to build, will continue to be an issue between the United States and Israel after this quite tense meeting between Secretary Blinken and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Absolutely, a potential collision course, as you said there, Alex. Thanks, Alex. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Tel Aviv. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Back to you in the studio, Anil.
Caroline, thank you. Happy weekend. Well, still to come on DD India Global. India launches Operation Indravati to evacuate Indian nationals from Haiti.
To chaos. Who has brought this Caribbean nation to its knees? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India.
You're watching DD India Global. I'm Anil Thomas. India's Prime Minister has been conferred the Order of the Dra Gyalpo by the King of Bhutan. Prime Minister becomes the first foreign head of government to receive Bhutan's highest civilian honor. The award recognizes Prime Minister Modi's contribution to strengthening India-Bhutan friendship and his people-centric leadership. Praising India's leadership, Bhutan's king, Jigme Kesar Namgyal Wangchuk, said India's future is bright with Prime Minister Modi at the helm. He added that Prime Minister Modi has serious responsibilities with global implications. Accepting the order of the Dra Gyalpo, Prime Minister said relations between India and Bhutan are going in the right direction as their aspirations are similar. He also said Bhutan has given the world a visionary concept of gross national happiness.
कि भारत उनका परिवार है, हमारे संबंध अटूट है, हमारी मित्रता अटूट है, हमारा आपसी सहयोग अटूट है और सबसे बड़ी बात है हमारा विश्वास भी अटूट है.
Well, Prime Minister Modi also announced a 10,000 crore rupees support to Bhutan in the next 5-year plan and assured it will be of rail, air and water connectivity.
हमेशा की तरह भूटान सरकार की 13वीं पंचवर्षीय योजना के लिए भी हमारा पूरा सहयोग और समर्थन रहेगा. मैं भूटान के मेरे भाई बहनों के बीच ये घोषणा भी करना चाहता हूं कि अगले 5 वर्षों में भारत सरकार इस दिशा में 10,000 करोड़ रुपए का सहयोग करेगी. हमारे रिश्तों की घनिष्ठता का आधार B2B के साथ साथ P2P भी है.
While giving further impetus to India-Bhutan ties, Prime Minister Modi held talks with the King of Bhutan, Jigme Kesar Namgyal Wangchuk. Renewing commitment to the special and unique India-Bhutan friendship, both the leaders reviewed the bilateral ties and discussed ways to take them to new levels. Earlier, Prime Minister and his Bhutanese counterpart, Shering Tokbey, presided over a ceremony for exchange of agreements in capital Thimphu. Both sides inked 7 agreements in their presence. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a 2-day state visit to Bhutan. Well, let's get you the latest on what's happening in India in the run-up to the world's largest democratic elections. Well, Bharatiya Janata Party or BJP on Friday released the 4th list of its candidates for the upcoming general elections, focusing on Puducherry and Tamil Nadu seats. The 15-member list featured P. Karthikayani from Chidambaram constituency in Tamil Nadu, actor and politician Radhika Sharath Kumar to contest from Virudnagar in Tamil Nadu. BJP has also fielded A. Namashivam from Puducherry and Rama Srinivasan from Madurai, among others. The opposition Congress party held its meet on Friday and finalized the candidates for Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Party President Mallikarjun Kharge and other members including Rahul Gandhi and General Secretary K.C. Venugopal attended the meeting. Well, India is carrying out Operation Indravati to evacuate its nationals from violence-affected Haiti. So far, 12 Indians have been evacuated from the violence-struck Caribbean country to the neighboring Dominican Republic. Taking to social media, India's Minister of External Affairs S. Jaishankar said, and I quote, India begins Operation Indravati to evacuate its nationals from Haiti to the Dominican Republic. 12 Indians evacuated, fully committed to the security and well-being of our nationals abroad. Thank the government of the Dominican Republic for their support, unquote. Amid violence and looting in Haiti, India has set up a control room and an emergency helpline to evacuate distressed Indian nationals. Haiti had been under a state of emergency after some armed groups attacked the country's largest prison earlier this month, killing and injuring police as well as prison staff and enabling some 3,500 inmates to escape. Nepalese Minister of Urban Development Dhan Bahadur Buddha and Ambassador of India to Nepal Naveen Srivastava jointly inaugurated the new building of Sri Jeshta Varna Mahavihar in Nepal's Lalitpur. The project was taken up under the post-earthquake reconstruction grant in the cultural heritage sector in Nepal. The Jeshtavarna Mahavir, which got damaged during the 2015 Gorkha earthquake, has now been reconstructed with the Government of India's grant assistance at a tendered cost of more than $1 billion. More than 70 Rohingyas are presumed dead or missing after a boat they were on capsized off the coast of Indonesia's Aceh province. UN's refugee agency said on Friday that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees also said that 75 people have also been rescued. The UNHCR said that if the death toll was confirmed, it would be the biggest such loss of life so far this year. Let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Japan's Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako visited the earthquake-hit Noto Peninsula on Friday. The city suffered serious damage not only from the earthquake but also a subsequent massive fire. The royal couple then visited a nearby public facility where more than 100 earthquake survivors are taking shelter. They also met police officers and community firefighters who have been engaged in disaster response efforts. With Easter around the corner, dozens of Belgian chocolate chefs presented a collection of surrealism-inspired Easter eggs on Thursday. The exhibition was celebrating a century of surrealism in Belgium. The eggs were sold for €500 each, with the profits said to be donated to a children's hospital. South African singer-songwriter Ty Lion and a recent Grammy winner released a self-titled debut album on Friday. The album has 15 tracks, which features collaborations with US rapper Travis Scott and Nigerian singer Tem. The 22-year-old went viral last year with her hit song, Water. With a cherry blossom in full swing or in full bloom in Japan, a popular poop museum in Japan also took part in a Sakura-themed event on Friday. The event's main attraction was a giant poop volcano at the center of the Unko Museum, displaying images of cherry blossoms through projection mapping. Well, that's all for this edition of DD India Global, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also find us online on ddindia.co.in. We're going to be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Anil Thomas from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global.